We're in John chapter 4. We have concluded 1 through 3. It only took us about 6 months to get through chapter 3, but we're ready for chapter 4. And as way of introduction, let me just real quickly review for you. Jesus got baptized by John the Baptist at Bethany beyond the Jordan. Then, that's the very beginning of his ministry. It's kind of like how he gets everything started. Then he almost immediately went up to Cana, and there was the wedding feast where he turned water into wine. And then what did he do after Cana? Went back down to Jerusalem, or they would say he went up to Jerusalem for one of the feasts. While there, he turned over the tables for the money changers, right? Somebody, if you don't mind, somebody look up real quick John 2:13. Could you read that out loud for us? Chapter 2, verse 13. I want to show you something that's kind of fun. Go ahead.
When it was only time for the Jews' Passover, Jesus went up to Jerusalem.
All right, so in chapter 2, Jesus is in Jerusalem. Right? We're going to mark that right there. Would somebody read for me chapter 3, verse 22?
After these things, Jesus and his disciples came into the land of Judea, and there he remained with them and baptized.
Jesus was in Jerusalem. Then, in chapter 3, it says he went throughout Judea. He was making disciples and baptizing them throughout Judea. Then look at our current chapter, chapter 4, starting at verse 3. He left Judea and departed again for Galilee. And he had to pass through Samaria. So, chapter 2, he's in Jerusalem. Chapter 3, he's in Judea. Think of Judea, Samaria, and Galilee think of them as regions. You could almost picture them like counties, but it wasn't governed that way. They were provinces, actually, but think of them like regions. So Jerusalem is in the region of Judea. He starts in the town of Jerusalem. Then the next chapter, he's in the region of Judea. The next chapter, our chapter tonight, he goes through the region of Samaria. Now, somebody jump over to the book of Acts, chapter 1 and verse 8. Jesus started his disciple-making ministry. All right, we noticed he got baptized. He went up. He did the first sign at Cana, turning water into wine. Then he started his disciple-making ministry in Jerusalem. Then he went throughout Judea. Then he went to Samaria on his way further to Galilee. He told the disciples to do the very same thing in Acts chapter 1 and verse 8. When it's time for them to begin their disciple-making ministries, he said, guys, do it like I did it. Start in Jerusalem, go throughout Judea, then to Samaria, the county next door, and then to the uttermost parts of the world. But I just thought that was fascinating. Maybe it didn't do as much for you as it did for me, but I thought that was fascinating when I realized Jesus started his disciple-making ministry, and it's almost like he modeled it for the disciples. Then after the crucifixion and resurrection, just before he ascends to the Father, he says, okay, guys, now it's your turn. And y'all start the way I did. do like I did. Jerusalem, all Judea around the area, then to Samaria, and then beyond. All right, chapter 4, verse 1. Now, when Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard that Jesus was making and baptizing more disciples than John, and then the gospel writer gives us a parenthesis, although Jesus himself did not baptize, but only his disciples, he left Judea and departed again for Galilee. So, Jesus is ministering in the region, the area of Judea, and the Pharisees notice that he's becoming even more popular than John. When Jesus realizes that the Pharisees know this, he decides it's time to leave that region. A couple of things there. On the one hand, he doesn't want conflict with the Pharisees yet. He knows that's going to come, but his hour has not yet come. It's not time for that yet. Also, he knows that the Pharisees are already they're asking questions. We looked at this at the end of chapter 3. They're kind of stirring stuff up between John's people and Jesus' people. They're kind of trying to create a little bit of a drama. And turn those people against each other. So Jesus says, well, we're just going to withdraw from here to put all that to rest and wait till the right time. And so he moves out of Judea and begins a journey to Galilee. And remember that Galilee, particularly Capernaum, is his headquarters. This is actually where he spends most of his 3-year ministry, is up there around the Sea of Galilee. They can deal with the crowd hanging out with that crazy John fella. You know, he dresses funny, he eats weird stuff, he says crazy things. And they don't really care a whole lot about that. But now this Jesus guy, he's got even bigger crowds than John did. So now all of a sudden he's showing up on their radar. And remember, it wasn't that long ago, like days, that he turned over the tables and made a big old stink in their headquarters. So now they're paying attention to this guy. So he left, verse 3, he left Judea and departed again for Galilee. Verse 4, he had to pass through Samaria. Now when you and I see that, when we read that, that's obvious, isn't it? If he's in Judea, in order to get to Galilee, he has to pass through Samaria. However, that's not what John and the original audience who read this gospel, that's not how they would have read it. Because they knew that Jews in Judea, Jews don't interact with Samaritans. So they knew that a devout Jew, a godly person, would not risk having contact with Samaritans and being defiled. So the Jews in Jerusalem would have come just on the other side of the River Jordan, going up on the east side and then back over. So they would avoid Samaria. So why do Jews have such a problem with Samaritans? Well, here's the fun history lesson. Are we ready? We have talked a lot about Babylon coming in and taking over Judah, right? We have not talked a whole lot, we don't talk very often, about the fact that before Babylon conquered Judah, Assyria conquered the northern kingdom, Israel. So you go way back into old history, and there was a time when there was one kingdom under King David. Not long after that, though, they kind of part ways, and they wind up being two kingdoms. One in the south, Judah. The northern kingdom was called Israel. You had Israel and Judah. This whole area made up the nation of the Israelites, but they were split into two kingdoms. All right? Assyria attacks the northern kingdom. That's 722 BC. Yeah, y'all be impressed with that. Come on. Now, Assyria had an effective way of defeating their enemies. If you go in with military power, you blow up the place, and then you move on, there's a good chance that there will be a remnant. There will be still some people will be there, and they will rebuild. That's what people do when things get blown up. We rebuild. Assyria had a different perspective on warfare. When they conquered an area, like the Babylons, they would take a lot of people from that area and cart them off. The difference is when Babylon did that, Babylon took a lot of the folks in Judah and took them back to Babylon. When Assyria did it in the northern kingdom, they grabbed a bunch of people from this northern kingdom and spread them out all over. They also took people from all over the place where they had power now. They were the world power at that time. They took people from all over and shipped them into the northern kingdom. By doing this, you don't just blow up the place that could be rebuilt. You completely eradicate the entire culture. That nation no longer exists. Today, we don't know where those 10 tribes are. You've heard the lost tribes of Israel. It's the northern kingdom. Assyria came in, took a bunch of them away, brought other Assyrian people from other regions in, and over time they started marrying each other and bringing cultures together, and the culture of the northern kingdom of Israel no longer existed, and to this day, who knows? That happened in this region. One of the kings early on established a town called Samaria. That town became like a headquarters, and eventually that name was assumed for this whole region. So these folks used to be Jewish. They used to be Israel. But now they are half-breeds. They are part Israel and part Arab. They're folks from all over this region who have mixed in with folks who used to be Jews. But this is why the Jews have a problem with the Samaritans. Remember, a huge purpose for the law in the nation of Israel. A huge purpose for most of those rules and the law was to keep the nation pure. Now, what's happening here is exactly opposite of that. They've intermingled with folks. They now have a mixture of a religion with other religions of other cultures, and it's all messed up. Over time, here's what happens. Some of them, the folks who are here, the Israelites who stayed here and then wound up intermingling with all the others who came in, now that third generation, fourth generation. Remember, this happened 700 years before Jesus comes on the field. During that 700 years, there's a lot that's happening. These folks are changing. So they are no longer real Jews, if you want to use that term. The Jews don't see them as pure Jews. Therefore, they're not allowed to come to worship in the temple. So what do? They still believe in the Pentateuch, or we would say the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible. They believe in the 5 books of the Bible. By the way, they do not accept the other parts of what we call the Old Testament, the prophets, the writings, but they do have the first 5 books of the Bible. Therefore, they want to worship God at the temple. They're not allowed at the temple because they're not really Jews, so they create their own temple. They build their own temple. They build their temple on Mount Gerizim. Now, because that becomes what they believe to be their holy place, tradition kind of adds to the holiness of this place, and they start saying this is where Abraham almost sacrificed Isaac. And that some even believed that that's where Noah's Ark landed. And we know that that's not accurate, but that's what the Samaritans believe, because they wanted to worship Yahweh. They had to have a temple, so they built their own temple, and then over time they kind of made that Mount Gerizim a holy place and gave it a little extra importance along the way. All right? With that background now, here's the story. Oh, verse 4, he had to pass through Samaria. You and I would say, well, of course he did. But the Jews and the folks who read this book first would have said, no, he didn't have to. None of us do that. We all go over this way. So why did John say he had to? Because there was a divine appointment. Not because that's where the highway ran, because that's not the case. He had to go through Samaria because there was a divine appointment. Jesus says that it is that he, later in this chapter, he says that his food is to do the will of the Father. The will of the Father compelled him to go through Samaria. And so in verse 4, he had to pass through Samaria. So he came to a town of Samaria called Sychar, near the field that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, so Jesus, wearied as he was from his journey, was sitting beside the well. It was about the 6th hour. All right, 2 or 3 things here. You can go today and you can find Jacob's well. We think that it's probably still the same spot. You go over to the Holy Land and there are churches representing all kinds of things, and you never know for sure. Is that really the church where the manger was? Is that really the exact spot? We don't know for sure. But evidence actually supports Jacob's well more than a lot of the other sites over there. So we think we know where this was. By the way, you can also go over to that area and find around 800 Samaritans that still live and worship on Mount Gerizim today. So this culture survived all these years. It says that Jesus went to this well, Jacob's well, close to the town called Sychar. Jesus, wearied as he was from his journey. Now notice the importance of that statement. Is Jesus God? Yes. Does God get tired? No. How does Jesus get weary enough that he has to sit down at the well? There's a big theological word for it. Don't worry about it. It boils down to this. that one of the awesome mysteries that we can accept in faith and never fully wrap our brains around is how Jesus is completely, totally God. And He is completely and totally human. In the beginning was the Word. The Word was God, and the Word was with God. Jump down to verse 14, and we find out the Word is Jesus. So Jesus is God. And yet, Jesus cried. Jesus bled. Jesus was hungry. He was thirsty. He got tired. He was completely human. And this is where the 3 days that I remembered studying, I think it's 3 days from here to there. But He's been traveling for a while. He gets to Jacob's well. He's tired and he's thirsty. And he sits by the well. It was about the 6th hour. And remember, when we keep time, the day starts at 6. They would count the days based on sun up. And with that in mind, they would just kind of start counting hours at 6. So if this is the 6th hour, what time of day is it? Noon. This is noon. A woman from Samaria came to draw water. Now that's weird already. It's not weird that she's drawing water. That's what women did. What's weird is that she did it at noon. Water's heavy. You ever had to carry water very far? Let's assume that they only went to the well once a day. That means you still got to haul enough water for the entire day and night. That's all the cooking, all the cleaning, all the drinking, whatever you got to do. So that's a lot of water. So it's hard work. Would you rather do hard work at noon or in the evening? The ladies would normally gather together later in the evening to go to the well and get the water. They would either come early in the morning or late in the evening, because that's when it's cool and that's when you have to do your hard work. What's strange is that she came at noon. You also notice in the story she's the only one there. That's why she came at noon. Nobody else would be there. Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink." For His disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. Now that just cracks me up. It's not supposed to. It's not intended to be funny. I just think it's funny it takes 12 guys to go to the grocery store. But I guess so. I don't know. I mean, even if I did go with 11 other guys to the grocery store, I would still have to call Lisa and say, "What aisle is the milk on?" I don't know. So the guys are gone. Now, I'm making light of it, but that too is by design. Jesus wants to have a personal conversation with this woman. So it doesn't say He sent them away, but I kind of picture it that way. Guys, there's a Sam's down the street. Y'all go find us some food for the journey home. I'm going to hang out here and catch my breath and get some water and whatever. And so he's at the well and she walks up. He says, "Give me some water. Give me a drink." The Samaritan woman said to him, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask for a drink from me, a woman of Samaria?" And she's making two specific points there. She says, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask for a drink from me, a woman of Samaria?" Not only is it weird that a Jew would talk to a Samaritan, But it's also weird that a Jewish man would talk to a woman. You didn't talk to women in public if you were a man. That would lead to gossip, and people would question, what's going on? You see those two over there? They're whispering, they're talking. I don't know what's going on. You didn't talk to women. And here he is, a Jew talking to a Samaritan, and more than that, he's a man talking to a woman. What's going on here? She says, why would you talk to me? Why are you asking me for a drink? And then John helps his audience. Remember, he does this from time to time. These parenthetical statements, because he knows that his audience is going to be bigger than the Judean Jews. And they may not all get some of the references, so he explains things. That's one of the reasons that we like John's gospel so much. It is intended for a large audience, the world. Anyway, so he gives us that parenthesis, for Jews have no dealings with Samaritans. Verse 10, then Jesus answered her, if you knew the gift of God and who it is that is saying to you, give me a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water. Notice that Jesus is a gift from God. Salvation is a gift from God. Nowhere does John ever even suggest or imply that you and I can earn it, can work toward it, can be good enough to become a Christian. It is always a gift from God. And Jesus says, if you knew the gift of God, who it is that is saying to you, in other words, I'm a gift from God, who it is that's saying, give me a drink, you would have asked him and he would have given you living water. One of the other things that John records throughout his work, Jesus likes apparently to use phrases that have double meanings. He often refers to physical things around them, right? He uses physical imagery that they're used to that has a double meaning, and that's what we have here. Living water, when she heard that, she would have thought of the difference between water that comes from a well or a cistern and water that is flowing through a creek. The water that's flowing, that's living, that's moving. And he says, I'm asking for water from this well. If you knew who I was, you'd be asking for living water. She thinks of a water in a spring. He's using it with a double meaning. Not just water that's moving like in a spring, but water that brings life. Later we learned that he uses the image of water to represent the Holy Spirit that comes into the life of a believer. And so he's saying, if you knew who I was, you would be coming to me for living water. The woman said to him, Sir, you have nothing to draw water with, and the well is deep. Where do you get that living water? One of the things that always gets us in trouble with email and text is you can't hear the tone, right? I think that's what we have here. I think, can I prove it? No. I think there's just a little bit of sass here. See, don't read it like, oh, how might this work? No, I think this is more like, yeah, dude, you don't have anything to draw water with, and this well is deep. How are you going to get living water? You don't even have a ladle. At least I showed up with a bucket. You ain't got nothing. How are you going to give me something? That's how I read it. The woman said to him, Sir, you have nothing to draw the water with. The well is deep. Where do you get that living water? Verse 12, are you greater than our father Jacob? See, that's why I think there's a little sass there. Are you greater than our father Jacob? Jacob dug this well. He had to dig. And what he provides for us is this well water, kind of like the water in a cistern. It's still, it's not living, it's still. And you're going to come in here claiming that you could give us moving, living water? And you don't even have a ladle? Are you better than Jacob? Now, it is interesting that she said, our father Jacob, because that is accurate. For Jacob would be the ancestor of this Jewish man, also would be the ancestor of the Samaritan woman. Because remember, the Samaritans were Israelites. They were Jews. And so her statement of calling him our father is accurate. He gave us this well and drank from it himself, as did his sons and his livestock. Verse 13, Jesus said to her, everyone who drinks from this water will be thirsty again. But whoever drinks from the water I give him will never be thirsty again. The water that I give him will become in him a spring of water, welling up to eternal life. He uses this physical image to point her to begin a spiritual conversation. He's saying this water is like an illustration. You come back here every day because you keep getting thirsty. This water from this well cannot satisfy your need forever. It's a short-term solution. He's about to point out to her that she has lived a life of jumping from one short-term solution to the next without finding that one that can satisfy her deepest need eternally. He's using the water to represent her life. Verse 15, the woman said to him, Sir, give me this water so that I will not be thirsty or have to come here to draw water. I don't think she quite gets it yet. I think there's still just a hint of sass there. Oh yeah, you got something where I don't have to come back? Let me have some of that, because I don't want to have to keep hauling this bucket back here every day. Jesus said to her, go call your husband and come here. The woman answered and said, I have no husband. Jesus said to her, you're right in saying I have no husband, for you have had 5 husbands, and the one you now have is not your husband. What you have said is true. I think what Jesus is saying here is, just like the water, you have to keep coming back time and time again, because it cannot fully satisfy that empty space. He says your life is the same way. You keep looking for that love that you're longing for, that will fill that emptiness in your life, and you have to keep going back to the well because you can't find it. You've been looking for love in all the wrong places. She's kind of like the lady that had been married 4 times. I said, can you look back over your life and help me understand how you married 4 times? Tell me about your husbands. She said, well, the first one was a banker. And the second one was an actor. She said the third one was a preacher. And the fourth one was a funeral director. I said, that's odd. How did that happen? She said, I did it on purpose, because there was 1 for the money, 2 for the show, 3 to make ready, and 4 to go. So he says, go get your husband. She said, I don't have a husband. He said, I know. You've had 5 of them. You've been looking, you've been drawing from the well, and you just keep drawing because there's an emptiness in you that you haven't figured out how to fill yet. Pascal said so long ago, he said that each of us is born with a God-shaped vacuum within us. There's an emptiness that only God can fill in our lives. And so Jesus is saying to her, you keep coming back and you keep looking for it and you hadn't found it because I'm the one who can bring it to you. I'm the one who can fulfill your life. I'm the one who can fill that empty spot and give you meaning and purpose. The woman said in verse 19, Sir, I perceive that you're a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, but you say that in Jerusalem is the place where people ought to worship. Now, when you read the commentaries, most of the commentators say that she is deflecting here, that he got a little too personal into her life. He was getting in her business. And so she's deflecting by backing up into this religious argument. I don't think so. Because there are so many things in which they differ. She could have picked all kinds of things for them to argue if she wanted to just pick a fight. I think she is becoming very sincere. She says, I perceive that you are a prophet. There's something about you. You knew about my emptiness. You knew about my heartache. You knew who I am. There's something special about you. And she said, I need to get right with God. Now, my people tell me that in order for me to do that, I would go to our temple to make sacrifices for sin on Mount Gerizim. Your people say that I should go to the temple in Jerusalem. Where should I go to make things right? That's how I read it. She says, 20, our fathers worshipped on this mountain. You say that in Jerusalem is the place where people ought to worship. Verse 21, Jesus said to her, Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. Why is that? There's going to be a time when Jesus is going to die on the cross and He's going to be the final sacrifice necessary. After He dies on the cross, that veil that separates the Holy of Holies from the rest of the world is torn in two. He's then going to raise from the dead and He's going to send the Holy Spirit to indwell believers. And when all of that happens, you and I worship God wherever and whenever we are. We can get right with Him wherever, whenever we are. We don't have to go to Jerusalem to get right with God. We can get right with God whenever and wherever. And so He says there's a time coming when you won't have to worry about which temple to go to. Verse 22, He said, you worship what you don't know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. He said, you don't even know who you're trying to worship. Salvation comes through the Jews. God has this plan in which He is using the nation of Israel to prepare the world to understand His redemption, His plan for us. And from this nation of Israel, He's going to send that Messiah who's going to make it possible for the whole world to get right with Him again. It's coming through the Jews. You don't even fully understand who you're worshiping. And I think what He's saying is, you don't quite get it, so listen to me, trust me. You worship what you don't know. We worship what we know. Salvation from the Jews, 23, but the hour is coming and is now here, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. Why is it coming? Because there will be a day when He has been crucified, resurrected, and the Holy Spirit has descended and filled believers. He says it is coming and is now here. Why is it here for her in that moment? Because He is there for her in that moment. The hour is coming and is right now here for you. He's saying, I am that Messiah. You don't even know the God you're worshiping, because Messiah is coming from the Jews and I'm Him. True worshipers then will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. In spirit and in truth. There's a whole lot wrapped up there, and if we had another 30 minutes, we would spend a lot of time working that out. But for shorthand, in spirit and in truth, your heart and your head. True worshipers worship sincerely from within their heart, but they do so in truth, with understanding, information, knowledge. She didn't even understand enough about Yahweh to know how to worship Him correctly. He says, but it's coming. True worshipers will be able to worship sincerely from their heart, and it will be based on truth in their heads. They'll understand what's true, the information they need. When the true worshipers worship the Father in spirit and truth, for the Father is seeking such people to worship Him. And that's when we find out why Jesus needed to go through Samaria. He normally wouldn't have. He would have come over here. Why did He need to? Because God is now seeking worshipers who will worship Him in spirit and truth. And He's going to find them in, of all places, He's going to find some of them in Samaria. Verse 24, God is spirit. Those who worship Him must worship in spirit and truth. The woman said to Him, I know that Messiah is coming, He who is called Christ. When He comes, He will tell us all things. And Jesus said to her, I who speak to you am He. In the Gospel of John, we have 7 I am statements. 7 times where Jesus says, I am the light, I am the bread, I am the water. This is not counted as one of the 7 because the order of the words, but this is just almost one of those I am statements. Here He says, I who speak to you am He. I am that Messiah who's going to come and bring those answers. Well, time is out. If we jump down real fast to 39, she goes and tells everybody in town, He told me everything I ever did. So when the Samaritans came to Him, they asked Him to stay with Him. He stays for 2 days. More believed because of His word. Then they said to the woman, it's no longer because of what you said that we believe, for we have heard for ourselves. We know that this is indeed the Savior of the world. First thing she did was go tell people.